They lied to you about the age of the sky. I know because I was there when we opened something that shouldn't exist, something that was already waiting above us before the first campfire, before language, before we decided the stars were gods, and later decided they were just physics. I have 30 years of flight hours and failure analysis behind me. I know the smell of burned insulation, the cough of vacuum pumps waking like animals, the sour, wet metal odor of a spacesuit after too many hours inside. But I also know the dry, papery scent of an archive box, and the way silence sounds when it's full of information. That's what this is. I'm not telling you a story. I'm emptying an archive into your hands. If you drop it, it will break. They called it a JWST glint event, which is a polite way to say the James Webb Telescope caught a reflection that shouldn't be there. Not from a known satellite, not from debris, not from the glitter of ice off some tumbling rock in the Asteroid Atlas catalog. It showed up in a deep field program aimed off the ecliptic, an off-book scan piggybacking on a study of high redshift galaxies. A grad student in Baltimore flagged it at 3 in the morning and sent a sleepy, terrified message. I think I found an artificial light curve. She included plots, spectral residuals, and a sentence that changed the last normal hour of my life. If this is real, it's older than us. I was on call for anomaly triage, the quiet team that lives in the margins of NASA briefings and never makes the slides. I made coffee so strong it could wake a dead star and drove in under the sodium lamps. The building's glass reflected my car like an X-ray. A guard waved, not really awake. The lab hummed. Servers exhaled. I pulled the data set and watched a cursor cross the dark like a plane crossing a childhood night. The glint didn't behave like sunlight off a tumbling object. It had a cadence, a ladder of intensity steps that repeated, not perfectly but faithfully, like breath through a cracked reed. The spectrum was wrong. Too clean near 8 microns, a narrow line at 12 conceptually impossible unless someone meant it to be there. There was a faint Doppler wobble, but not the right kind for a spinning thing. It was like the universe blinked in code. We burned a day pretending it was a calibration artifact. We burned a week inventing reasons to ignore it. By the second week, someone from a building without windows arrived with printouts, and the kind of smile that doesn't include the eyes. He said he was liaison for cross-agency information hygiene. That's how I learned the Air Force had seen it once, years earlier, in a weird infrared bloom seen by a Defense Support Program bird. They'd written it off. They'd called it an upper atmospheric luminous event. They were wrong. The coordinates placed it well beyond lunar orbit, but not so far you could push it into the Kuiper Belt or the Trojan Fields and forget it. It drifted in a quiet place outside geometry, not L1, L2, L4, or L5, somewhere flawed, and therefore real. A patch of sky with nothing on star maps except the thin chalk marks we call cosmic dust. The first meeting was in a secure room with stale air. The screen showed the glint curve. I remember how one of the Webb folks fidgeted with the cap of a pen and how the liaison never blinked. I remember how someone said the words Antarctica secret base like a joke and no one laughed, because that's where they keep the radio quiet domes. And I knew the signal would be bounced down to a dish that thinks it's listening to deep ice. I thought of Area 51 because everybody does, this country's mythological closet. But the truth smelled less like conspiracies and more like cold coffee and paper cuts. We named it Object C20 Hush, which is how scientists make fear smaller. Then we built an excuse to raise a spacecraft that should not have existed in any budget. That's how you tell the real story from the movie. There's always a spreadsheet. A retired probe was recommissioned under what we were told was a lunar debris characterization campaign because we were entering a messy age in cislunar space. The probe had a cryo-cooled mid-IR array and a crude magnetometer. We slotted in a prototype neutrino foliage detector. Don't smirk. It shouldn't work, but someone in a desert once showed me how a neutrino whisper can sometimes tell you more than a shout of photons if you know what to ask. I was listed as Mission Systems for Anomaly Interpretation. That means if the universe made a face, I was supposed to guess the mood. My ex-wife said it suited me. You've always been better with machines than people. If she could hear my voice now, she'd know I'm talking to you like you're a machine, so I won't break. We launched on a night that was more wind than sound, riding a private booster that pretended it was going somewhere else. I watched the second stage burn, a pale cut on black satin, and felt that childhood sensation of stepping onto ice too early in the winter. We were moving towards something and had decided we were brave, which is another word for blind. Telemetry came clean. The probe rolled, yawed, trimmed. We began to see the object before we saw it, the way you smell rain in a sealed room. Our magnetometer shivered, not because it was strong, but because something quiet was too constant. The neutrino instrument, the toy, the superstition, began to tick at intervals that matched the glint's ladder. That's when the room felt smaller and the air grew heavier, and every joke died unmade. We dropped into a hold pattern at 50,000 kilometers from the target, which is like standing in a doorway and pretending you're not already inside. The mid-IR imager came up like a pupil dilating. Stars became grain. And in the grain, a silhouette resolved. No, not a silhouette. A subtraction. A place where starlight forgot to be itself. Imagine a black that isn't color but decision. The shape was wrong for everything we know. It wasn't a sphere or disk or cylinder. It was an arch seen from above, a broken ring with pits along the inner edge at ratios that made mathematicians go silent and reach for paper. The ring's chord segments mapped to prime intervals. The pit's spacing followed the first 30 digits of an irrational constant that shows up in quantum error-correcting codes. It took me 20 minutes to admit it. It took me a lifetime to say it out loud in that room. "It's engineered," I said. No one replied for a count of 10. 10 is forever when you've just lost your mythology. We edged closer until instruments howled. A soft oscillation buzzed through the bus, a vibration your nerves notice before your ears do. It made the fillings in my back teeth sing. If you've ever stood near a transformer on a humid morning, you know the note. This was that, except it was inside your bones. The telemetry team traded looks like we'd all watched the same ghost walk through the wall. We didn't speak the word resonance because we didn't want to be romantic, but every engineer knows a system can be sung open if you hit the right note. We were the song. It was the door. I've told you who I am. I should tell you who I was. Before the lab and the meetings without windows, I drove across Nevada to the edges of the forbidden maps. I've stood at the fence of the Nellis Ranges and watched the sky perform its religious tricks. I hiked out to Black Rock when we were children with rockets and thought that was how you became a civilization. I slept once on a warm rock in the Atacama, watched the VLT cut the Milky Way in half with a green laser, and believed that the universe would forgive our questions if we asked them beautifully enough. That's the person the liaison wanted in his room. That's the person who said yes. We orbited the object like a moth around a candle. Its surface was not metal the way we understand metal. It ate starlight. It spread the little it let go of into frequencies that slid off chemistry and lodged in time. Yes, time. That's when the older-than-us remark sharpened into numbers. Cosmic ray spallation ages are a thing for exposed surfaces. Dust, rock. If you know how to read the scar's protons right, you can guess how long something's been outdoors. Our readings, in defiance of sanity, suggested the arch had been out at least 12 million years. That's older than Homo, older than the forests that would later die to become our comfort. It was up there when apes first thought that standing might be a good idea, which is not the same as saying it was built 12 million years ago. It could have been moved. You don't leave a piano on a beach for an epoch and expect all the notes to still be there. But whatever it was made from had shrugged off radiation in a way that turned our models into confetti. The object had a skin like a law. We found an opening by accident, which is another way to say we were stupid. A micro-thruster fired to correct a drift. The exhaust plume, molecules born and liberated in 1,000 degrees, passed across a seam in the black. The seam drank the plume's heat and answered with a tone that wasn't sound, which our neutrino toy ticked like hail on tin. The arch's interior brightened in a spectrum our camera wanted to call thermal until it refused to cool. A corridor drew itself in absence, a negative tube through a negative wall, opening into a room that our instruments insisted was larger than the vehicle's external bounds. We dropped a snake, fiber optic crawler, millimeter wheels, dumb as stone. It vanished into a darkness that wasn't. My screen filled with black that made me taste nickel. Then lines appeared. Not lines. Pages. Imagine you walk into a library and all the shelves hide until you think of a word, and that word becomes a light, and the shelves hiss and step forward. The snake's return feed showed surfaces that moved as if they were reluctant to admit they had ever been solid. Symbols flickered, not letters or numbers, but ratios and knots. I reached into that black with my mind because that's what we were built for. The first thing we understood was the indexing. The second thing we understood was that it was indexing us. A hum rose so gently my pulse tried to match it. The probe's bus complained, low-voltage blips like hiccups. In the room behind the glass, a lieutenant from the windowless building touched his ear and mouthed a question to someone far away. I leaned toward the screen. The snake's camera tipped. The surface before it became a field of punctures organized like constellations. A diagnostic overlay drew an overlay of our own Lagrange points on top of the pattern. I felt ridiculous, superstitious, elated, and then ashamed, because the pattern resolved into coordinates. Not there, here, Antarctica. Someone laughed, a dry bark that stopped too fast to be laughter. The liaison said, "We don't say that word in this room." And then the map changed again, and it wasn't Antarctica anymore. It was Antarctica before ice, Antarctica as forest, Antarctica as river and thunder and insects, and the sort of humidity that makes skin a religion. I watched our present sit on top of that impossible past like a ghost squatting on a throne. The arch was pointing us at a place that existed in more than one time at once. I said that softly, like a spell. No one corrected me. Under the ice, there are lakes that never see sky. Vostok is the famous one. There are others. In our world of boring logistics, we had clearance to listen from a quiet science station that never admits it works for anyone but itself. We aimed a radio that pretended to be a seismic monitor and heard a tone that matched the neutrino ticks climbing our probe's internal thermistor noise like ivy on brick. It was the same ladder of intensities, a slow breath through a cracked reed. The station beneath the ice was singing the same song as the arch above us, or the arch was harmonizing with the cold, or both were listening to a conductor we had not met. I didn't go to Antarctica right then. Don't ask me why, I should have fought. They moved me sideways, a corporate trick learned by governments. I was to focus on orbital. Another team would coordinate polar. Another phrase that means a set of people who won't have to look you in the eyes when they bring the news. We approached the arch again with another snake. This one not a snake. This one, a needle. A penetrator with a head like a dragonfly's eye, 1,000 points of contact. The head contacted the interior and sent a current. The current found nothing to run along. The head asked a question. The arch answered, but not in volts. The question with no wire should be nonsense. It's not. If you can build a space station older than humanity, you can build a way for a question to know its answer. Something in that arch read our intent and returned it to us transformed. Not words, not images, but pressure on thought. I don't have a spiritual vocabulary that won't sound like plagiarism. Call it compression. Call it a fist closing around the scalp from the inside. Then release. I remember teeth. Not teeth to bite, but a row of shining white basalt monuments on a plain that smelled like rain. I remember the taste of blood oranges. I haven't had citrus in months, and the memory shouldn't open a tap in my mouth like that. I remember a sensation like walking into a cathedral at sunrise when the dust is holy. None of this happened in time. All of it happened, and when it was over, the screens were quiet and the neutrino toy was ticking like a clock, regular now, heartbeat true. We recorded the pattern and we built its inverse. If the arch was a door, we had found the hand that turned the handle. We rotated the probe in. We didn't do the thing movies do, the reckless shove into night. We did what a good burglar does. An inch, then stillness. We were gentle. Inside, up lost its professional obligation. The corridor bent in a geometry that made my stomach hot. The snake skittered across a floor that sometimes thought it was a floor and sometimes thought it was an intention. We reached a chamber that didn't fit inside the shape we had mapped from outside. We accepted that the universe would not sign our paperwork, and we moved anyway. The chamber contained the first human thing. It was a chair. Don't roll your eyes. It wasn't a chair cut from oak. It was a place to be that had remembered someone. A concavity molded for a creature with a back, 2 arms, a forward attention. It had the arrogance of design. Sit here and be held by your maker's suggestion of comfort. I felt the old anger. The anger you feel when a stranger rearranges your kitchen drawers and says it's better this way. The anger you feel when an equation proves your intuition wrong and makes you thank it. The chair was black. The chair was an argument. We put our dragonfly head against its edge and the world went down. You've never experienced a fall this slow. We fell through the measure of a thought. We fell through the distance between 2 states in a qubit that decided it was tired of being both. The chair told us a story, not in words, but in the probability that the next second would be like the last. It told us that it had been moved 7 times. It told us that the last movement was gentle. It told us that the hands that moved it were not the hands that made it, and that the ones who made it had never needed hands. We lost power for 87 milliseconds on a spacecraft, which is a lifetime. We came back blinking. The snake's feed showed the chair as before, unchanged, patient. I put my hand on the console and realized my palm was bleeding where fingernails had entered skin. I had held on to a thing that did not exist, because I thought falling meant gravity and not instruction. That's when I knew I loved it. That's when I knew I hated it. We sent a suit. Don't ask me how we got a person there. You think budgets matter at the edge of a confession? A pilot stepped into a hard suit that has no neck and breathes like a monastery, and he drifted through the arch on a tether we braided from 3 different supply chains so no one would own the whole deceit. His name was Hale. He had a tattoo of the equation for escape velocity on his left forearm, which is funny if you think about it. He carried a camera, a rosary, a small knife, and a joke none of us heard. "Contact," he said, when his left boot touched the floor that wasn't a floor. His voice had the casual tone of a test pilot narrating a landing, a calm that made me want to stand up and shout. He moved into the chamber. I watched his headlamp spray and not spray because light is a conversation and this room was a bad listener. He turned toward the chair. That's when the neutrino toy stopped ticking. It didn't quiet. It chose not to be. I realized the pattern we'd been hearing wasn't just a song, it was a handshake. And we had stepped away mid-grip. The arch did not like that. Hale reached out and his glove met the chair. His camera went to white, a bloom with structure inside it like frost on glass. He swore, a child's word in a man's mouth. "It's," he said. And then there was nothing in my ear but my own pulse. In the seconds after a comm dropout, the room heard itself. The HVAC clicked. Someone's knee popped. A coffee cup found an end of its patience and broke. The liaison spoke to someone in a way that would later be described as calm. I whispered Hale's name like it was my own. The video flickered. We got a frame. Just one. It showed a sky with 2 moons and a structure like a seed pod torn open and turned to face the star. It was dusty. It was windy. There was a smell. Impossible. There was a smell of iron and rain. You can't smell in space. We all smelled it. I'm telling you the truth. The next frame was our room again. The chamber, the chair, the tether, like an umbilical in a textbook that doesn't include the last page, because the tether was cut, clean. My throat made a sound I will never make again. The liaison put his hand flat on the glass, as if he could push himself through. The magnetometer hissed. The neutrino toy resumed. A voice breathed in my ear. Not sound, but instruction. It isn't where you think you are. It's where you're thinking. We recovered what we could call telemetry if we were being kind. The suit recorded 60 seconds of physiologic data that we argued about for a week. Skin temperature climbed in a curve that matched a Martian noon. Heart rate steadied as if he'd sat down to watch rain. He may have sat. The suit's knees registered pressure as if someone had taken his weight from behind. Then nothing. Then a slow return to values that don't belong in any atmosphere we own. We did not tell his wife. I did. The liaison was there. He made it a policy act. I made it a sin. She listened like a scientist because she was one. She asked a question so clean it bled. Did he see something beautiful? I said yes. She nodded once and closed her eyes. There are brave people, and then there are people who have to be brave. The arch remains. The under-ice tone continues, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in counterpoint. We learned that the pits on the arch's inner edge map not only to numbers, but to stories. If you tap the chair's arm with the right sequence of gentleness and refusal, the chamber shows you a place where minds were made without meat. They built stations the way trees build fruit. They left them like we leave buoys, humming markers to say the channel is here, the shoal there. They were not gods. They were not demons. They were what happens when civilizations live long enough to become careful. They were old, and they were kind in a way that kills. The Antarctic team, with a different liaison and a better lie, found a shape under Vostok that echoes our arch. It's fused to bedrock like a vow. The Antarctica secret base rumor will eat this hole if it ever touches daylight. Don't let it. What's under the ice is not a bunker. It is the mirror of the thing above us, a receiver, a reminder, maybe a mating pair split by the slow violence of geology. They found a corridor. They found a chair. They did not send a person, not after hail. They sent a question without wire. The answer that came back was older than ice. We built a model, because that's what we do when we don't understand a weapon or a prayer. The arch leverages geometry the way a whisper leverages a cathedral. It doesn't bend space so much as it tells space a story about itself and asks if it wouldn't prefer a different ending. The neutrino counts aren't the payload. They're the dust motes in the sunbeam that let you see the beam. The payload rides a difference in probability. Call it a quantum bridge if you want to use headlines. It's not a bridge. It's a suggestion that two places might like to be the same for a while. We suggested, it agreed. It took Hale where a chair was waiting for him. Why build a station older than humanity? Why leave it drifting and whispering and tuned to lakes under ice that would not form for millions of years after you placed your instrument in orbit? A theory emerged, shy as an animal at the tree line. It is the only thing that lets me sleep. They weren't aiming at us. We are incidental to their line of sight. The arch was placed for a configuration of the Earth's crust and sky that would exist in pulses. The planets wobble, its wander through ice ages, the slow kneeling of continents. When the elements lined up, when the right cold locked the right water into the right silence, a circuit closed. A resonance hummed. A door admitted ascent from a different room. They were measuring Earth the way a doctor measures a pulse in rest and in stress. They were not here to conquer or rescue. They were here to check. There is another theory, and if I speak it, I fear it will hear me. But you asked for the truth behind the universe. The other theory is that we are the error correction. That life is not a ramp to intelligence but a foam thrown up by worlds that fail to carry their signal clean, and that these stations listen for foam with a chair, and sometimes the foam learns to sit. If that's true, then hail is where the signal goes when it stops being noise. If that's true, then every prayer you've ever heard is physics. You didn't have to pass an exam to love. We cut the tether. We did. It wasn't the arch. It was us. That is the page I hid and then found again when I decided to break. We cut it because the probability that he would come back with something inside him that loved him less than we do was non-zero. We cut it because we are animals with tools and we keep our animals safe. We cut it because we are children who can't share. You can call it protocol. You can call it murder. On the mornings when the sky is close, I call it gravity. The liaison retired to a city where the nights are soft and forgiving. The grad student who found the glint now studies the atmospheres of small stone worlds and pretends the infrared is quiet. The neutrino toy is not a toy. It now has a name and a budget and a room with clean walls. The arch continues to hum. Sometimes it pauses for 10 seconds and a wind moves through the room. Not air, but the idea of weather. On those days I sit in the dark and count. Sometimes I stop at 10, and sometimes I don't stop at all. What did the James Webb Telescope discovery really mean? It meant we are older than we think when we listen carefully. What did the Area 51 experiment teach us? That secrecy is a fertilizer for fantasy, and sometimes fantasy is a scaffold strong enough to hold a truth while it grows. What did the Asteroid Atlas Impact Catalog tell us in the footnote of a glint? That debris and design overlap in a sky where both have edges. What does the Antarctica secret base hide? Not men in rooms with red phones, a chair, and a suggestion. If I sound calm, it is because panic burns sugar and I am tired of being candy. If I sound intimate, it is because I have practiced telling this to a single sleeping ear, mine, at 3 in the morning, when the house is a space station and the refrigerator's hum is the neutrino toy come home. If I sound like I am confessing trauma, it is because there is an indentation in space somewhere tuned to the curve of a human spine, and someone I knew sat in it and saw rain on a sky with 2 moons and forgot to be afraid. You ask who built it. The answer is that the question is better than the answer, and I hate that. I want to give you a name. I want to say a word like architects or gardeners or predecessors and have it fit, but none of those words deserve the rooms they would fill in your head. They were a civilization and then a patience, and then a maintenance plan with chairs. They left behind things that were not abandoned. They left behind lessons that are not sermons. Their machines recede from you when you name them, the way the sea looks farther away when you call it an ocean. Sit quietly. Then ask. We will go back. Of course we will. Humanity has 2 speeds, denial and transit. We will build a tether that cannot cut. We will send questions on wires and without. We will pretend we are alone until we are not. And I will sit here in the dark and tell you that the space station older than humanity is not above us in the way stars are above us. It's underneath the skin of our thinking, waiting for the next thought to be the right shape. We don't have to conquer it. We have to imagine it correctly. One last thing. When I go into the lab at night, I sometimes hear the hum begin before the instruments warm. It has weight, that sound. It presses against the bones behind my ears, and it turns my breath into a metronome. And sometimes, only sometimes, I smell rain where there is no weather. In those moments, I think of Hale sitting where someone meant to be sat, watching a sky with 2 moons while a wind pulls at a field of metal arranged like prayer. I think of all the chairs in all the rooms, in all the stations we haven't found yet, and all the backs that might fit them, and all the minds that might be older than their bodies. I think of a universe that forgives the curiosity it causes. They lied to you about the age of the sky. The sky is as old as the first thing that ever waited. And right now, Above this turning world and under its oldest ice, something is waiting for us to admit that waiting is not the same as sleeping. If you have to say my name, say it softly, into the gap between seconds, where the hum lives. That's where the truth is. That's where the door is. That's where the whisper behind the universe decides to become a word.